Hello everybody, I want to talk about negotiating the right types of benefits. Negotiations today are much different than years previous. For one reason, there's fewer unions, of course, and union members than in the past 70, even 100 years. The power of unions has changed and the nature of the workplace has changed as well. We see technology, communications, and government policies and practices have made a much more different world than ever before. With that, there are certain aspects of unions and management negotiations that have changed, some for the better, some for the worse. What has changed is the focus in four particular areas. First, loyalty is no longer a factor, so longevity, skill, and knowledge pay is less valued. Back in the day, union agreements had certain criteria that if met, employees would receive those monies. It didn't matter if the organization was productive or profitable. If you met those criteria, you received those monies. Criteria were usually that you had a certain number of years of experience. That would be longevity pay. So if you had 5 or 10 or 15 years longevity pay, you'd receive additional monies. Same with knowledge if you have a certain educational degree. Training if you went to certain classes. Also skills if you had an apprenticeship that you completed. You automatically got money. It doesn't happen much anymore. Because whether you have those accomplishments, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be able to be more productive. That leads us to the second aspect, which is pay is much more directly tied to performance. It's not, as I often say, what you bring to the table, it's what you do once you're at the table. And so pay is becoming much more of a component of your performance. And that leads to number 3. We're seeing more part-time and contract employees that in some ways are becoming much more standard. Why is that? It's because organizations want to tie their expenses more towards their revenue. If you hire somebody full-time, you have to compensate them usually on a consistent basis of 40 hours a week and also provide them a level of benefits. If your revenues go down, you still have that expense. Now organizations are trying to tie their expenses to revenues. So with a part-time or contract employee, if your revenues aren't where they should be, you can certainly cut your expenses, which means you can lay off or reduce the hours of employees. It's much more of a productive aspect for employers. The last aspect is one that we've witnessed too far and for too long, and that is the declining and in some ways the elimination of many benefits for employees. Starting in the 1950s, there was an escalation in retirement and health care benefits for employees in addition to unemployment, and a number of different benefits that came to really allow employees to receive a much more generous component of the compensation or the revenues that an organization was able to achieve. There was a thought that employees helped that organization achieve those revenues, so they should be getting a larger slice, a bigger piece of the pie. Not that there isn't any truth to that, but today what we're seeing is organizations are struggling much more than they ever have, and they're not able to compensate employees at the same level of benefits that they did some years ago. In fact, there's some police officer and firefighters that receive an additional 50% of their compensation goes to retirement. Very few organizations can achieve that. They certainly can't afford it. So that's what we see, that negotiations are different between unions and management in relation to compensation today. No longer is money directed towards longevity. Pay is much more directed towards performance. Part-time and contract employees are certainly becoming much more standard, and benefit costs are continuing to diminish. All is not an imperative to a future that we certainly can't enjoy, or one that we can't look forward to. It just means that it's different. And those that profit in different times recognize these differences and then work to overcome them. Thanks, everybody.